What a great piece of theme music. And when you hear that tune, perhaps a number of things do come to mind. First of all, perhaps a cartoon panther. It's the Pink Panther theme, of course, and you can envision that Pink Panther that we've all come to know and love. Maybe you're thinking about the fact that Henry Mancini, the great composer, composed that tune, and start to think about all of the wonderful music that Henry Mancini composed. Or maybe the Pink Panther theme conjures up a vision of Peter Sellers as one of the most comic and hilarious screen detectives ever. But hopefully after tonight's program here on Public Radio KCBX, you'll hear that theme and a name will come to mind, and that would be Blake Edwards, the director of the Pink Panther movies and much, much more. We lost him. He's in the Take Two spotlight tonight here on KCBX. And it is Take Two, the movie program, having this discussion with me tonight. The one, the only, and boy, it's good to see him. It's Bob Whiteford.
And across the aisle for me, the undisputed czar of film on the Central Coast, a man I am proud to call friend. I know you are too. We're talking about the one, the only King Vidor Award-winning Jim Dee. And Jimmy, it's really fun to be back on the air here doing this tribute to Blake Edwards. It's sad that we have to do it because he's passed away, but what an incredible body of work he's left behind. And some of the great actors he's worked with, as you mentioned, Peter Sellers, William Holden, Julie Andrews, his wife, James Garner, James Coburn. Holy cow, I'm missing a bunch of people here. Dudley Moore. Wow. I mean, we're going to be talking about a lot of people. Buddy Ebsen.
Well, Blake Edwards, you know, the name isn't too much of a household name, but his movies certainly are, and some of his movies extremely iconic, I would say. And maybe they're a little bit dated here and there. Maybe there's even a little, shall we say, affectionate political incorrectness that I kind of, actually, it's refreshing in a way, dare I say. And you know, Bob, I was noting that Blake Edwards, we think about his movies Pink Panther, The Party, Days of Wine and Roses. We're going to be covering a number of those tonight, but we are going to leave a bunch of stuff out, just to, like you said, the hugeness of this man's career. After you listen to the show tonight, if we've sparked your interest, go check out the Blake Edwards filmography. He's written a ton, he's directed a ton, and hopefully we can point you in that direction of this amazing talent. Some of the basic information, Blake Edwards was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In 1922, he passed away in Santa Monica, California, December 15th, 2010, leaving a remarkable body of work and one of the, shall we say, successful marriages. Blake Edwards married to Julie Andrews for many, many years. In fact, we probably have how many years they were married together, but one of those, well, I don't know how rare, that I'm making a judgment call here, but they were married for a heck of a long time and a great couple.
And I think it's worth noting they made a couple of really great films together. I think of their first pairing, 1964's Americanization of Emily, with Julie Andrews and James Garner and James Coburn. One of my personal favorites, and without a doubt, one of the best scathing, and let's face it, we've talked about this before on the show, we have a special place in our hearts for when Hollywood eviscerates Hollywood. And, of course, I'm talking about the 1980 or 81 classic S.O.B. And Julie Andrews is wonderful in it, as is William Holden, Robert Preston, Robert Webber, Loretta Swit. I mean, you could go, it's just loaded with people, and it's Robert Vaughn as the cross-dressing studio head. I mean, it's just marvelous.
Well, we'll get to that later on in the program. But, you know, Bob, we're looking at the career and the history of Blake Edwards, his early days, he had some bit roles here and there. He was actually an actor. In fact, in reading up on Blake Edwards, I guess he has a very small role in The Best Years of Our Lives, and I don't remember him in it, but I want to go back and find him in the film because I love that movie.
And he actually played the lead in the same year, 1946, in a Poverty Row classic horror film called Strangler of the Swamp. It was produced by Producers Releasing Corporation, which was actually below Monogram in the Poverty Row scene. And he was the hero of this kind of 59-minute black and white, bizarre, but very effective film. I remember him from it because it was one of the best Poverty Row films I had ever seen done.
Well, again, when we look at some of these great directors, we go back to those beginnings, and in this case, Blake Edwards taking on some minor roles, but as he begins to become a director and a writer, where does he cut his teeth? On early television. And boy, how many directors have we talked about that? To John Frankenheimer, Sidney Lumet, and they really get their chops going with that wonderful early television where everyone was sort of experimenting or, really getting out there and doing some spectacular things. Now, I think of the 50s and 60s of American television, and the Western was, of course, a staple. But Blake Edwards, I think, took his cue from some of the great film noirs and some of the gumshoe detective films, a la, Maltese Falcon or Big Sleep, and created the early Peter Gunn series, Mr. Lucky, and there's another television show that I wasn't quite familiar with. Oh, Richard Diamond, Private Detective from 1957 to 1960. Now, I don't mind saying that, the Peter Gunn show and Mr. Lucky will date me because I must have been 7 or 8 years old, and I loved these shows. I remember watching them, and it's great. We've got a clip, but it really took me back, not just watching those shows, but of course that indelible Henry Mancini music. And we should just say right here, the 1-2 punch of Blake Edwards writing, directing, Henry Mancini making, I don't think of Henry Mancini as a movie soundtrack guy, but he's probably the ultimate in making theme music that you immediately hear the music, you relate it to the movie, and they're catchy as hell, and you hear them once and they're pretty much stuck in your brain.
Well, they're a great collaborative combination. I mean, you think of Ennio Morricone, and you think of Sergio Leone, you think of John Williams, you think of Steven Spielberg. There's some Bernard Herrmann and Alfred Hitchcock. They're just interlinked. They're utterly simpatico, and the relationship between Blake Edwards and Henry Mancini, well, they're just wonderful collaborators because Mancini just seemed he hit the right chord, literally and figuratively, in all of Blake Edwards' great movies. You hear a few chords, you know exactly what we're talking about.
I think that's really hard to do.
I think so too. It's very rare. I mean, film composition is different now from what it used to be anyway, and I think by mentioning Peter Gunn and Mr. Lucky, this was the beginning of their collaborative relationship. And when you hear the themes, you go, right away what they're talking about. The Peter Gunn theme, you can't mistake it for anything else, and it's Blake Edwards.
Well, we have a kind of a murky audio clip here from the very first episode of Peter Gunn. We're going back to about 1957-58. In the role of Peter Gunn is Craig Stevens, and of course, in quintessential to any gumshoe detective a la film noir film, you've got the narration over, talking about, well, this is just what happened. And in this clip, it's the end of the show. And, the crime is solved. And, of course, we have Craig Stevens with his voice overlay. And, of course, he's walking into a bar to have a good stiff drink and to listen to a woman singing on stage. You'll hear that in this clip. And then we go into the final credits, which opened with written and directed by Blake Edwards and that unmistakable theme from Henry Mancini.
Sometimes you get lucky. You take a chance on a bluff and it pays off. Most of the time, when you get mixed up with men like Fallon, the wrong people get killed. This time was no exception. They found the little tailor on the bottom of the river. 10,000 he left behind didn't keep his widow from crying for a long time. But this one had its good side, too. Jacoby got Fallon and made it stick. When the rest stood up to be counted, there were enough around to make it worthwhile. Hello, sweetheart.
What's the matter? Don't you have a home?
Maid's night out.
The oceans roar 1,000 drums. Can't you see it's love? Can there be any doubt when here it is, day in, day out?
Jog any memories of watching the Peter Gunn television show back in the 50s, early 60s?
Wow, that is just something else.
I mean, you have a theme song like that, Bob, but you almost have to take the American International Roger Corman approach. You've got the theme song. You've got to have a movie to go with this, you know?
Exactly. Well, you know, it's funny. The theme song, I've seen a few episodes not too long ago. The show was only like half an hour long, which means in reality with commercials back then it was like 26 minutes or 25 minutes. Crisp, rich, to the point, and the theme exactly the same. I mean, to do so much with so little, utter genius in terms of time. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, when we think back to like the great detective films, like maybe Maltese Falcon and the Warner Brothers stuff, where Max Steiner has some themes that are running through the films. I mean, that's one thing. But again, like you say, taut, crisp, you get this theme by Henry Mancini, and it locks you in. I mean, that's probably the greatest bass line ever, you know, in any even in the Peter Gunn theme. We didn't bring in the theme from Mr. Lucky, which is another one I was watching when I was around the same time. It's another Henry Mancini classic, and I do remember Mr. Lucky with the opening with that trippy looking cat. It's almost like this modern art look to it back in the early 60s, whenever it was. But again, a great theme from Henry Mancini and Blake Edwards at the helm of both Peter Gunn, Mr. Lucky. And just to note, he was working on some other television shows. I didn't know that Mickey Rooney had a show from 1954 to 55 called The Mickey Rooney Show. But Blake Edwards was involved in that. Also, the Chevron Hall of Stars, the Ford Television Theater. He really had his hand in television pretty heavily in most of the 50s. So, and again, that the dynamic duo of Blake Edwards and Henry Mancini goes without saying. Well, let's move on now. We're going to play the theme by Henry Mancini from an iconic film from Blake Edwards. In fact, this is probably the one film that has withstood the test of time. It still feels like kind of a 60s film, but the star power is, you know, everywhere on this film. And all we have to do is play the theme, and we know the film that you're talking about. Well, music by Henry Mancini, that is Moon River, and of course the film that immediately, well, should come to mind unless you haven't seen it is Breakfast at Tiffany's, a film pretty much for the ages. But you know, Bob, when I think of Breakfast at Tiffany's, you know, it seems like a '60s movie. It's very beautifully shot, very vibrant in color. We have Audrey Hepburn, George Papard. But there's kind of an undercurrent of something that's a little deeper, a little more. I'm not sure what I'm looking for here because there is the relationship with Patricia Neal, which
Right.
is sort of has that sugar coating that came along with, you know, I mean, I'm comparing this to like some of the Cary Grant and Doris Day movies, but you know, there's a relationship there that's
Rather tawdry.
rather tawdry.
There's a thread of tawdriness underneath the sugary, the cinematic, cinemascope, crazy color, you know, vibrant colored Hollywood facade to this film, which is makes it kind of interesting. It's worth noting this is his first time out as a director of a feature film, and it's based upon a short story by Truman Capote. And really, what we have here, we have what is often the case with a great film is it's almost like you have three different films within the film. You have almost like that Doris Day, Rock Hudson comedy, Technicolor comedy, very much prevalent in that era. You also have a film that's, to some degree, starting to break down the Hays Code and it's smuggling ideas. I mean, George Papard and Audrey Hepburn basically are prostitutes in this movie, yet they're ingrained with a lot of humanity because they're clearly people that don't want to be that. They want to be something else. And what's fascinating about this in so many ways is that we have. I remember from the Patricia Neal show, we were talking about her relationship with George Papard and how if the film had been made 10, 15 years earlier, she would be in the she'd be in the Audrey Hepburn role. But that's just one sidebar to this. This film probably would have been radically different had it been made 10 years later.
Yes.
Clearly, especially with, you know, a lot of the barriers and nudity and whatnot, probably would have been a major change in how this film came out. But Audrey Hepburn, in an iconic performance, I hate using that word, but the fact is, it is an iconic performance. And here it is, a half a century later, that film is still, young gals to this day watch that film and just fall in love with her style and her elegance and her class. And it's wonderful to see that happen because it's an interesting, I mean, this film could have been so tawdry and crappy that, and case in point, this could have been a total piece of junk, and the reason why is the Mickey Rooney part,
Yeah.
which is what dates it. It's kind of the drag on it. But, you know, it's worth noting, I think, in retrospect, that it still needed to be there. Clearly, at that time, he could have hired somebody who was Japanese to play that part. But for some reason, he chose Mickey Rooney. Maybe because he had worked with him in television. And Mickey Rooney's career needed a boost. You know how Hollywood works. It works a lot along those ways. Oh, come on, Blake, I can do it. And he went, okay, Mickey, you gave me my break in the business. So on that level, I might be wrong. You know, I might not be. But on that level, all right, I'll grin, I'll bite my lip and just endure that. But overall, it's still a fascinating film.
Bob, you were talking about the gloss and but again, like I love the word that you used, tawdry, because here's a relationship between George Papard and Patricia Neal, and it's the old nudge, nudge, wink, wink. He's just a gigolo, pretty much, in this film. But the film doesn't feel that way. There's sort of you understand that that's happening, but somehow it's presented with this sort of innocent facade, but it's not that innocent, let's just say.
Well, I think, and this is the Blake Edwards touch in the sense that he'll take us to an unsavory place, but it still stays human. There's still a humanity to it. It's not dehumanizing. They're still people. And that makes it palatable. And I like that in terms of how he develops his characters. This is a thread we see in a lot of his movies, because we go through a lot of different situations. He's made some great comedies, to be sure, but some harrowing dramas as well. And there's that thread. In the unsavoriness is humanity, and it makes it, we can relate to it.
Here's a scene from Breakfast at Tiffany's, and in this scene, George Papard has been somewhat stalked by Buddy Ebsen, who is a wonderful, we know him as maybe from his television work, but he should have been included maybe in our character actor show.
Oh, he's wonderful in this.
He is really great. Well, Buddy Ebsen has been sort of stalking George Papard, and of course the character of Audrey Hepburn is somewhat mysterious, and we do find out a bit of the truth about her in this scene from Breakfast at Tiffany's.
All right, what do you want? Son, I need a friend. That's me. That's her. That's her brother Fred.
You're Holly's father?
Her name ain't Holly. She was Lula Mae Barnes. Was till she married me. I'm her husband, Doc Golightly.
Paul Varjak.
I'm a horse doctor, animal man. Do some farming, too, near Tulip, Texas. Her brother Fred's getting out of the army soon. Lula Mae belongs home with her husband, her brother, and her children.
Children?
Them's her children.
She's got 4 children?
Now, son, I didn't claim they was her natural-born children. Their own precious mother, precious woman, passed away July the 4th, Independence Day, 1955, the year of the drought. When I married Lula Mae, she was going on 14. Now, you might think the average person going on 14 wouldn't know their own mind. But you take Lula Mae, she was an exceptional person.
Well, that exceptional person is Audrey Hepburn, and of course she is not what she seems. We just find out her history in that scene with George Papard and Buddy Ebsen.
I know. It's just wonderful. Great film.
That was from Breakfast at Tiffany's, directed by Blake Edwards, who's in our focus tonight here on Take Two. Well, before our break, we can move into a film that amazingly Blake Edwards made right after Breakfast at Tiffany's. And we talk about some of the lightness of that film. We're going to be getting into the Inspector Clouseau films later. But boy, Bob, here's a film that I only saw for the first time, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago. I was familiar with the theme, and in fact, maybe we'll lead into our 7 o'clock break with the more Henry Mancini music. You hear this theme, and you know the movie. But boy, talk about no holds barred. We're talking about the Days of Wine and Roses. And what we'll do right now, we'll have Hank, our projectionist, put this theme music. We'll take our break, and we'll come back with more on that amazing film, Days of Wine and Roses, with Jack Lemmon and Lee Remick. I mean, it's really pretty groundbreaking in a way, and it holds up, it would withstand the test of time. So taking us up to our break, here's the theme by Henry Mancini from the Blake Edwards film, The Days of Wine and Roses. You're listening to Take Two on public radio for the entire Central Coast of California. KCBX and KCBX HD1, San Luis Obispo. KSBX, Santa Barbara. KNBX, San Ardo. Streaming worldwide at kcbx.org, where you can also find the Take Two program archives. If you'd like to write to the program, the address is movies@kcbx.org. Take Two is also featured at npr.org.
Take Two is sponsored by the 2011 San Luis Obispo International Film Festival. Complete information available at slowfilmfest.org.
We're back on Take Two, the movie program here on Public Radio KCBX, broadcasting from the Central Coast of California. And I'm here with my good friend Bob Whiteford. My name is Jim Dee. We're talking about the incredible filmography, the career of Blake Edwards, who we lost in December of 2010, leaving back an incredible body of work and some amazing films that are great talking about on tonight's program. Before our break, we played the theme from Days of Wine and Roses, more wonderful music from Henry Mancini, who we've been talking about as the right-hand music man to Blake Edwards. And you know, Bob, I have to think of films that take on alcohol addiction. I think of The Lost Weekend, later on perhaps Leaving Las Vegas with Nicolas Cage. But I'll tell you, as I mentioned before, I first saw Days of Wine and Roses probably just a couple of years ago. And this film floored me as far as its honesty, and just it didn't pull any punches. It didn't have any cop-out endings or little, fun fairy tale endings. Days of Wine and Roses, and again, I was deceived by that theme and the fact that it's kind of romantic. It's a beautiful theme tune, but the film takes no prisoners. It looks at alcoholism straight in the eye, and I'd say this film holds up incredibly well, considering it's, 40 or 50 years old. Right. But, takes a look at alcoholism, and apparently after the filming of this film, both Jack Lemmon and Blake Edwards had some problems with alcohol, and they went to try to help themselves after making this film because it was such an incredible experience. But folks, again, we were talking about the director of The Party and Inspector Clouseau, Pink Panther. This film goes completely in another direction as far as just no holds barred at looking at alcoholism.
Jimmy, I would say I've seen this film once in my life all the way through. I mean, I've seen bits and pieces of it over the years, dozens of times. This is one of the most harrowing films about addiction. I'd put it right up there with Darren Aronofsky's Requiem for a Dream. Great film, so unsettling that it's almost like you only need to see it once for it to be effective. And that's a testament to just how great a film it is. It's well written, incredible. The performances are fantastic. Jack Lemmon and Lee Remick are flawless in this. And I like what you said, Jim. I'm sure the studio was going, give us the happy ending. And to Blake Edwards' credit, he said no. There's no happy ending to this film. I mean, Jack Lemmon barely survives, and his love affair with Lee Remick is utterly shattered, destroyed completely. And the only way he can get off the booze is he's got to basically wean himself off the woman he loves because she can't save herself, and he'll only destroy himself if he stay. I mean, he's got no good choices, and neither does she. And it's just so powerful. This is so well written, so well acted, and the direction is superb. It's such an honest film at a time when they were still trying to sugarcoat everything. I mean, you can't believe that it's the same guy who did The Pink Panther. It just doesn't seem possible, yet it happened. A great film, one for the ages.
I don't think this scene needs any introduction. Here is Jack Lemmon and Lee Remick in Days of Wine and Roses.
Debbie, you run outside and play for a while. I want to speak to your mother. Come on, honey.
What's the matter, honey?
Honey, we got to talk about something serious. Oh, no! Sorry.
What's the matter? You drunk?
Oh, I haven't had a drop.
Well, what's the matter with you?
I walked by the Union Square bar. I was going to go in, and I saw myself, my reflection in the window. And I thought, I wonder who that bum is. And then I saw it was me. Now, look at me. I'm a bum. Now, look at me. Look at you. You're a bum. Look at you. And look at us. Look at us. Come on. Look at us. See? A couple of bums.
Hurts.
Now, look. Listen to me. You got to listen to me. It came to me. All of a sudden, I saw the whole thing. You know why I've been fired from 5 jobs in 4 years, and it's not politics. Like we always say, it's not office politics or jealousy or any of that stuff. It's booze. It's booze.
A couple of drinks.
We have more than a couple of drinks. We get drunk. We stay drunk most of the time. Look at that dump that we live in and the clothes that we wear. We send that child off to school like she's looking... I'm a drunk and I don't do my job, and that's it. I'm a drunk and I don't do my job, and I get fired and I can't get a job now, and We should have done this a long time ago, taken a look at ourselves and realized we just turned into a couple of bums.
Honey.
What?
Honey, I love you.
I love you too, and I don't mean that I didn't, but we gotta face this, huh? Please.
Kind of takes my breath away. And folks, as unsettling as that scene may be, that's just a warm up, because what is very amazing about this film, it's a very slow build in the fact that, a couple of drinks after you get off work, and it kind of slowly snowballs, and then there's the social acceptance where you got to have that drink at the office party or whatever it may be. So the way Blake Edwards handles this material, and of course incredible performances from Jack Lemmon and Lee Remick, it's a slow plunge, but boy, do they ever plunge. And quite frankly, I forget where that is in the movie. It's about midway through. There's a lot more hell to pay in this film, and I don't want to give the connotation not to see this film, because I think if you do see it, it is as timely as ever. And if you can get a copy of Days of Wine and Roses, it's quite an experience, and a universal film about addiction. It's really worth seeing.
Very powerful movie. Very powerful.
Okay, we'll take a deep breath, and now we're going to move on to perhaps Blake Edwards' greatest creation. Of course, we're talking about Inspector Clouseau and Peter Sellers. And Bob, I thought, and I was wrong, that A Shot in the Dark was the first Pink Panther film. Well, it wasn't. It was actually the second. The Pink Panther from 1963, 1964, A Shot in the Dark came out. But I remember I must have been about, 12 or 13. I went to see A Shot in the Dark probably 2 or 3 times in the movie theater. I thought it was hilarious. I loved it. And the music, of course, grabbed me. And maybe I'm just trying to think if it was one of the first times I saw Peter Sellers. But, a preteen or an early teen going to see this movie, and, of course, seeing some of the subsequent films. What a hoot, and what a unique creation. And, I'm thinking now that here's Blake Edwards, who created, the Peter Gunn series and Mr. Lucky. And so he takes The Private Eye and completely turns it on its ear and makes it absolutely hilarious, and probably letting Peter Sellers, run amok and create this character. And it's the butchering of the French accent ongoing that's great. And as we were talking about before going on the air, Bob, so many films today that are quote unquote comedies. Here's a scene and here's an interaction between some characters on screen, and it builds up to say, a punchline or a joke, and you hear the patooch, and then the scene ends. In the clips that we'll be playing from here on in some of the comedic films of Blake Edwards, we're talking about extended conversation. We're talking about conversation that kind of builds in its comedic crescendo. I mean, it's not like, the one note joke and, we're going to play a few clips here, and if you don't crack up as you keep going and it gets funnier and funnier as it goes, that to me was the art of his comedy, and the fact that it's not just the one-line zingers, it's this ongoing, very funny dialogue, very funny situations.
And I think it's worth noting the Pink Panther series, which started, I think, in 62 or 63 and went, oh gosh, I guess the last one was 83, which was unfortunate. However, the cast that worked on these films is worth noting. Yet Peter Sellers, who is absolutely at the top of his absolutely insane game doing this, and Herbert Lom as his foil. Casting Herbert Lom as the foil it was genius. And Bert what's his name? Bert Kwok. I can never pronounce his name, but as Clouseau's kind of not quite Bruce Lee like, man. Brilliant. And, the first film had David Niven and Robert Wagner, and all the other films had great villains in them that were, not really bad per se. They weren't diabolical like Dr. No or anything. Wonderful series, just wonderful, and I loved the European locales. It really gave it a special je sais quoi.
Je ne sais quoi. Well, okay, we're going to skip ahead to Return of the Pink Panther, the screenplay and by Blake Edwards. This is from 1975, one of the later ones. We mentioned Shot in the Dark and Pink Panther from the early 60s, 63 and 64. But here's a scene. Peter Sellers as Clouseau has been demoted to a policeman by Herbert Lom, his chief, I guess you'd call him. And of course, he's making the rounds. And as Peter Sellers, socks it to essentially an organ grinder in front of this bank and has to be extremely officious. We should make mention that it's not apparent in the clip, but as Peter Sellers, as Clouseau is doing his thing, the bank behind them is getting robbed. And of course, he's completely missing out. But listen closely to Peter Sellers as he does that sort of pidgin French. It's not quite French. It's sort of a French accent, but, one time he says a word a certain way, next time he says it another way, but it's all completely hilarious. This is Peter Sellers in Return of the Pink Panther.
You have a license?
Monsieur?
City Ordinance 47B prohibits the playing of any musical instrument in a public place for the purpose of commercial enterprise without a license.
I don't understand.
It is against the law for you to play your musical instrument.
The law?
What?
You say is against the law?
Yes, unless you have a proper license.
What kind of license?
A license that permits the playing of any musical instrument in a public place for the purpose of commercial enterprise.
Commercial enterprise?
Yes. You play that thing and people give you the money.
People give the monkey the money?
It is the same.
Oh, not at all, monsieur. I am a musician and the monkey is a businessman. He doesn't tell me what to play and I don't tell him what to do with his money.
Monsieur, don't try to be funny with me. He is your monkey, therefore it is your money.
He lives with me, but he is not my monkey. One day I came home and I found him sitting in the living room I let him stay, but he pays for his own room and board.
Then the monk is breaking the law.
But he doesn't play any musical instrument.
City Ordinance 132R prohibits the begging.
How do you know so much about city ordinances?
What sort of stupid question is that? Are you blind?
Yes.
Oh, I see, yes. Yes, of course. Well, you happen to be talking to a police officer. And because I expect to be transferred back to the detective division at any moment, I will let you off this time with just a warning.
Thank you, Monsieur Argent.
But you must get yourself a proper license.
First thing tomorrow.
Try to do something about your filthy monkey.
Idiot!
How was I to know he was the bank manager?
How were you to know the bank was being robbed?
That is correct.
What is correct?
I did not know the bank was being robbed because I was engaged in my sworn duty as a police officer.
It's the voice of Herbert Lom in the end of that clip, who is Peter Sellers' superior, and of course, as Clouseau is doing the shakedown of the organ grinder that the bank robbery is taking place. He escorts the robbers down the street, and he knocks out the bank manager.
Just wonderful.
Well, just that extended conversation, it seems to get funnier and funnier, and the butchery of the French accent gets more and more. It's, sort of the undercurrent joke is here's the Frenchman who can't understand Clouseau's accent. Well, the Pink Panther movies are always great revisiting, and of course for the great writing and Peter Sellers in the role of Clouseau. Here's another great one, another unique Peter Sellers creation, and of course we have Blake Edwards at the helm when we're talking about The Party. Peter Sellers, and again he's playing, a person from a different country, this time from India. He was he's in Hollywood. Bob, I hadn't seen this movie in years. I was watching bits and pieces of it, but what a crack up. And again, Peter Sellers maintaining this man from India who's just, lost in this Hollywood, the partying and the millionaires, the money, but he's just a fish out of water completely.
Well, you know what's great about this film, Jim, is that Blake Edwards uses Peter Sellers to perfection in this film. Because you're right, it's like Sellers is the Indian movie star who's really a fish out of water in Hollywood, and he's kind of innocent. He's a little oblivious and kind of innocent in a way like Clouseau is. He's bumbling, but you can tell he's from a totally different culture, and we empathize with him because we're outside of Hollywood too. We're just, we're the people in the movie-going audience would be as much out of sorts as this poor Daffel. So we really get it's really an interesting, because it's another scathing look at Hollywood, just being Hollywood. Gavin MacLeod as the movie director on location is pretty funny, and it's worth noting that Blake Edwards doesn't pull any punches. He really lets the Hollywood crowd have it, and he uses his muse, Peter Sellers, as his smart bomb, if you will, to go in there and just make everything go crazy. This is wonderful. I mean, this film, I keep using that word wonderful, and you know what? But it works for me tonight. I mean, this film is concise. It's maybe like 95 minutes long. It's not the longest film, and it gets the job done. It's got wonderful music from our man Mancini. Peter Sellers at the absolute top of his game. I mean, right down to his summer linen suit and his white loafers with no socks. I mean, he just nails it. And it's worth noting the the sweet voice thrush of the moment, Claudine Longet, the
yes.
notorious Claudine Longet, is very good in this as well. They make a wonderful pair because she seems not of this as well, so we can empathize and identify with both of these characters. The Party is wonderful satire, wonderful comedy, wonderful slapstick comedy. It's almost like an ode to Buster Keaton as well. Just a great film, wonderful, a lot of laughs.
Yeah, and Bob, we're not going to get into it, and we're going to play a funny clip from The Party, but, Blake Edwards did go to, head-to-head with the studio with, I think we were talking off the air about Experiment in Terror, and there was a few other films where the studio came in, kind of messed with it, and, of course, Blake Edwards did go, fight with the studios where they wanted to manipulate his films. And, here he was a veteran, and he had hits under his belt, and yet the studio had to do their tinkering. And of course, later on we'll hear from Blake Edwards himself and the fact that some of those studio fights were very beneficial as well as somewhat harrowing. But back to The Party. Here we have a scene early on in the film. Peter Sellers in this movie, unfortunately, it's supposed to be in an ancient time, and he's wearing something around his wrist. This is from The Party.
God damn it! God!
Mr. Bakshi.
Yes, sir.
Has it occurred to you that the period of our picture is 1878?
Oh, yes, indeed, sir. I'm well aware that is the period of the film, 1878.
Mr. Bakshi, are you also aware that in 1878 they weren't wearing underwater watches?
Yes, sir, I know that. They had not even been invented.
Got the time?
Yes. Oh, my God.
All right, lunch, everybody.
Lunch, that's 42 on the crew, 1 hour for the cast.
Well, yeah, it's this period piece, and of course, Peter Sellers is fun to take off this glowing watch in the middle of the desert. So, and then, of course, the bumbling continues from there as he gets to Hollywood and ends up. How much of a majority of this film does take place at the party?
Probably about almost all of it.
Yep.
It seems to take place. It starts on the set of this kind of version of Gunga Din gone terribly wrong on quote-unquote location, and then it's at the party. And it's, of course, the head of the studio that's just fired him from this, disastrous film is throwing the party, and he shows up there, and it just gets weirder and weirder and weirder. It's amazing how much fun you can have in one house.
Yes.
Even in Hollywood.
We highly recommend Blake Edwards' The Party. Well, we've got a lot to cover here in our final minutes, but we do want to touch upon the film that Bob mentioned earlier, the most scathing, or one of the most scathing Hollywood films about the underbelly of it. We're talking about S.O.B. And what a bunch of stars in this one. And we should just play this clip there and set up this clip. Director, I forget who it's played by.
Richard Mulligan.
Who wakes up, looks at the Variety, and realizes that his, $30 million movie, which at the time of this film was probably like $100 million, is a major flop. And what he wants to do is commit suicide. So here we have William Holden at the bedside of this director who has been attempting suicide and tries to talk him out of it. This is from Blake Edwards' film S.O.B.
Felix, for the last 40 years, I've lived a life of dedicated debauchery. I've consumed enough booze to destroy a dozen healthy livers. I've filled my lungs with enough nicotine to poison the entire population of Orange County. I've indulged in sexual excesses that would make Caligula look like a celibate monk. I have, in fact, conscientiously, day in and day out, for more years than you've been in this best of all possible worlds, tried to kill myself. And I've never felt better in my life. So, if you're really going to end it all, I can show you a half-dozen great ways to do it.
What'd you give me? Oh, a pinch of this, a dash of that. Sometimes referred to in the trade as a sleeping beauty boilermaker. Take no notice if he begins to levitate. It's a common side effect.
It's from SOB, and a wonderful look at the dark underbelly of Hollywood, but with a snicker and a wink. It's a great one. Now, we also want to get in a couple more clips because we got an important one here. Blake Edwards' career sort of went up and down. He had a hit here and maybe a flop here. All of his films weren't hits, but he did strike gold with the film 10, and mining not only the wonderful talent of his wife, Julie Andrews, but the wonderful Dudley Moore. And we're talking about that conversation that is creative and interesting. And here's a conversation, Dudley Moore and Julie Andrews in the movie 10, and they're talking about the definition of the word broad.
Now, you want to argue or you want to make love?
Define broad.
Your definition or mine?
No, I know yours.
A girl who screws around a lot.
A hooker.
A hooker's a hooker. The fact that they both spread their legs doesn't make the terminology interchangeable.
What's the difference?
A hooker sells it.
So does a broad. The only difference is a hooker makes the price going in.
Ah, so by definition, a broad is less virtuous than a hooker.
Oh, as far as I'm concerned, virtue has got absolutely nothing to do with it.
As far as you're concerned, or any man for that matter, virtue has everything to do with it.
Listen, I just said broad. You chose to apply a disparaging connotation to the term.
Come on, George. Are you really trying to tell me that broad is not a term used by men to describe women in a disparaging fashion?
I'm just saying I didn't use it that way.
Would you call me a broad?
That depends.
On whether you were watching me through a telescope while I was fooling around with your degenerate neighbor?
No.
Okay, you define it.
Well, first and foremost, I don't equate the term exclusively with sex, voyeurism, or, quote, degeneracy. You do that.
So do you, but you won't admit it.
Broad to me is just another colloquial term for woman. Like dame, skirt,
Moll.
crumpet, moll. I'm sure John Dillinger never used that word in a derogatory fashion.
For authority on female aggrandizement, consult the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
Better still, let's look it up.
No, I want your definition, not Webster's.
I'm going to get Monsieur Roger's definition. You know my definition? Broad means woman. Not good, not bad, unless so designated.
You said a broad does it for money.
You said a hooker sells it. I said so does a broad.
Okay, if a broad is a woman, then women screw for money, huh?
Some women.
Broads.
Broads do it for other things, but in a way they sell it. Right, here we are. Woman. Dame hen petticoat.
Slang or derogatory, Jane Broad. Hey, look, slang, derogatory, broad, okay? How about that, smartass?
That is Dudley Moore, Julie Andrews in 10, a big hit for Blake Edwards. And, we're going to leave you tonight, and it's been great talking about Blake Edwards. I've been enjoying this a lot with you, Bob. We are going to leave you with Blake Edwards receiving an honorary Oscar for his lifetime achievement. He was handed... it was handed to him by Jim Carrey, who was a big fan of A Shot in the Dark and Blake Edwards. And listen to the end of this because he does tribute his wife. And Bob, it was great to see you, but we're going to end up with Blake Edwards getting his honorary Oscar, and we'll see you next week on Take Two.
Absolutely.
I've been allowed a minute and a half of 90 seconds, my choice, to thank everyone that made it possible for me to receive this honor. When I started giving it some thought, serious thought, everyone, got me here tonight. The first person that came to mind when I tried to pick them out was a little guy who worked on The Party, the film I did called The Party, and he used to come out with a shovel and scoop up the elephant poop. And as he did, he sang "There's No Business Like Show Business." And then there was a confused Italian actor that we tried to get him to understand what this okay sign meant in our vernacular. Okay, we just said, just do that. And he always did this. And so we decided, better we conform to him than he to us. So from then on the set, I would say, get the shot, Phil. Cutting room, you drop a couple of frames just before the alligator swallows the chimp. Ralphie? You think Audrey can sing it, Henry? The point is, each and every one who has contributed to this moment, friends and foes alike, yeah, I couldn't have done it without the foes. I'm steamed and I'm going to prove you're wrong. Okay? So with everyone, from the little guy with the shovel to the discerning folks in the academy, my mother thanks you. My father thanks you. And the beautiful English broad with the incomparable soprano and promiscuous vocabulary. Thank you. And I sure as hell thank you.